Hello, everybody. My name is George Kors, and today I'm bringing you a very special advice from a novelist video reading across languages. Now, if you've been on the channel, you probably have heard me talking about novels from different languages, books of poetry from different languages. And today I just want to talk a little bit about what it is to read across languages, in my opinion, and what you can do to take up this practice on your own. And for a little bit of context here, just to give everybody's credentials, why am I saying this? Why are you listening to me? I have a degree in linguistics. I have a degree in German. I've lived in Germany. I've lived in Saudi Arabia, and I've experienced a lot of different languages. And I have four languages: English, which you are listening to right now, German, Spanish, and Arabic, at various capacities. And I try every day to read in all four of those languages. So I want to talk a little bit about that and what, sort of from a maybe more critical philosophical standpoint, as somebody who's educated a lot in languages, what that means. Now, before we dive deep into that, I just want to say, if you like the channel and you want to support me, my new novel, Sing Lazarus, came out in June of 2025, and you can go buy it. I've got the link and all that down below. Buying it, reading it, reviewing it, talking about it is really meaningful to me as a writer, and it's really meaningful to my career, and it helps the channel because I get to keep making these nice things, with the hope of, encouraging everybody out there to take on whatever literature it is that they want. So if you would like, Sing Lazarus, my second novel, is out. You can do that. I also, you can buy Always the Wanderer too, if you're interested. So let's talk about reading across languages. I have here just a gigantic list of some of my materials that I use across all of these languages to aid in the reading of different languages. And let me just sort of get this all here. And let me just hold this up for you real quick. Oh my God, so many. You'll notice a couple of things. Yes, I am lacking in Spanish dictionaries. That's on my to-do list for sure. Um, and let me just say, the Arabic works tend to be upside down, but that's because the Arabic books are flipped. They are read from the opposite direction of English. You don't need all of this. You don't need all of this. You don't necessarily need the degree in a language. That helps, but you don't need all of this. And I just want to encourage you today. This is my formal moment encouraging you to sort of think, hey, what can I do to engage in those languages better? First off, let me just say this. To start off, interacting with a novel or a book of poems, the physical object, interacting with that is interacting with the cultural object. So if we take a step back from, I'm not going to understand a word in it. I took Spanish in high school. There's no way I'm going to be able to read Don Quixote. Fine. Interacting with the object is a cultural experience in and of itself. Let's talk about why. You are interacting with the writing, perhaps in its original language. If we use Don Quixote as an example, by looking at it in Spanish, even if you don't understand a word of Spanish, somehow you say, I just don't understand any of it. If you're not willing to give yourself any grace there, interacting with the book is still engaging with the cultural object that is near and dear to the people of Spain and many people throughout the world who love Spanish literature. So even to page through it, to look at it and to not understand it, that is okay. Take that verb to understand and pause it for a little bit, put it aside, and appreciate that by looking at this piece of paper, you are experiencing a cultural object in your own way. Certainly something is there. There is something of worth there. Do you need to own it? Do you need to engage with it on a regular basis? Maybe not. However, you are still able to engage with it, even if you don't understand the language. Even just looking at the text is a meaningful engagement in that text. It's a meaningful recognition of another language, of other cultures, of modes of expression. And it's also, you being humble and saying, even though I don't understand it, is still worthy of my attention. So to start us off there, I want to set that standard here that what you're experiencing, even if you do not understand that language, is a culturally rich and worthy thing. And I would go even further here to say one of the things I see, as a person who interacts with Arabic and who reads and attempts to speak Arabic, that I see tons of people absolutely not even engaging in Arabic at all in any way because it has a different script. And maybe you don't engage with Bengali or Japanese or South Korean or Amharic, any other number of languages, as a result of your not understanding the script. Again, looking at the script, looking at how beautiful it is, and Arabic is a great example here, is a cultural experience. There is such a great tradition of calligraphy in Arabic, for example, where the language is art. Go tour a mosque. Go tour a mosque and look around at how beautiful the language is rendered. It really is something that is worthy of your time. And to just out of hand say, no, I don't even want to engage with this because I'm never going to understand it, is missing so much of what it is that we love about literature, which is sometimes just picking up a book that we love and looking at it and appreciating that it's there and saying, this book of poems is meaningful to me in whatever my context is. And maybe you've read the translation of it, and if you've read the translation of it and it's so important and beautiful that you love it, I wouldn't shame you for, actually, let's take the word shame out of here. I wouldn't say it was weird at all for you to buy the original, even if it's a language you've never experienced before, and just look at it and interact with it. And maybe to, I don't know, look up a couple of words. Maybe you buy one of these dictionaries. Some of these, cost $4 used on the internet. And we're not even talking about Google Translate. We're not even talking about all of the various tools that you have and are available to you to even just learn a word from that original text. So there's more than just reading that's going on here. There's more than just I checked the box of I understood what was on the page, which is such a reductive way for us to view cultural objects in general, let alone literature. Language is so rich, it's so ambiguous. There's so much going on there. When I look through any of these, the Arabic verb lexicons are a great example of this. Look at this multitude of verbs that are in a language and how rich it is, and the nuance that you can invoke in a text. It is something that's, even if we're doing that on a superficial level and just recognizing that it exists, that is worthy. And the thing that I would say here, if you are to a place where maybe you have that degree and you have that degree in a language or linguistics, and you are ready to start engaging in a text, just ready to start reading a novel or a book of poems, or I don't know, a memoir, whatever it is that you want to engage with, and you're starting to buy objects that look like these, you're starting to buy things that are going to help you in that. One of the things I've talked about in another video, but I think marks a critical reader, and I say that from like sort of a more critical analytical perspective here, as somebody who's taught writing a lot, I would say one thing that marks a really good reader, and good I know is a value judgment, but we're going to keep it just for the moment, is somebody who isn't hung up on, did I understand everything? What instead we're doing is saying, what did I not understand? How can I get to a place of better understanding? Getting hung up on, I read a page and didn't understand a word on it. Getting hung up on, I don't understand half the words here, or some of these words I don't know. This is a mental block of you stopping yourself from the process of accumulating that rich experience with the language. we have to be humble here. There are texts in your native language where you will absolutely not understand a word on the page. That is human expression. That is the depth of language. That is the nuance of language right there. That you can be on this planet speaking the same language for 75, 100 years, and you can pick up a text that is rendered in that language and not understand it. That is how rich and multitudinous our languages are. So, with that humility in mind, you accept that and continue on. Um, I was, out having drinks with a friend, and talking about languages. And one of the things that came up is, folks, I don't have this skill for languages. I don't have this, um, talent. You have a talent for languages. And I don't know that I do either. And I don't know that anybody does. And part of that is because I know for a fact that multilingualism has existed before literacy existed. People spoke multiple languages well before anybody knew what a letter was, or what an alphabet was, or what it meant to have Rechtschreibung, or the Académie de Français, or any of this stuff, or defining text that really, this is a definitive cultural text, something like the Quran, right? This status of humanity as being polyglots has, as people speaking many languages at the same time, this has existed for much longer than literacy has existed. And now you are from the benefit, you have all these tools. And I'm not even referring to or talking about digital tools. They're out there. You can use them in whatever capacity that you see fit, right? So, eat a little bit of that humble pie, and, take a deep breath. Those moments of understanding, even if they're few and far between, are well worth it. And if you're here to be a critical reader, for the love of literature and for the love of culture, it's well worth your time to attempt this task. And to pause a little bit of that self-criticism because of reading comprehension. This is not a test. A lot of you probably aren't going to end up being professors or subject matter experts in this. So to that end, it is the stakes are relatively low. The stakes are, you are a thoughtful person engaging in culture. Not, I'm going to be fired from my job if I don't understand this. And there are many instances where there are very high stakes, interlanguage exchanges. Migration is one of them, of course, in a world filled with borders, of course. But you going out, going to the Arab language bookstore, and buying a book of poems that you love in the original, or buying Don Quixote in the original Spanish. This is not some big, gigantic, looming thing that is going to destroy you. It's going to uplift you, and it's going to really be just a really enriching experience. And one of the things that I would say here, that we need to ask ourselves as readers, if we're saying, okay, I'm going to start reading across languages, and I've got a little bit of Spanish, and I've got a little bit of French, and I'm going to start reading in each, and maybe you're lacking confidence. One of the things to sort of do some soul searching on with yourself is, what is your goal as a reader? What is your goal out there? A lot of different people have a lot of different approaches to what it is that they constitute as literature. And maybe do a little bit of that critical analysis yourself. Maybe you're not a humanities trained person. That's fine. You don't need to be. You don't need to be that. It can really help give you some tools to be a thoughtful and critical reader and thoughtful and critical thinker. But you should not be dissuaded. You can develop those skills elsewhere. And one of the questions that I would ask you, if you were saying, sort of exploring what your status is as a reader, is, let's think about this in a more contemporary sense. Are you here for, something like Goodreads, something a little bit like Book Talk or Bookstagram, where there is, this external validation, motivation that's occurring in your reading praxis. And that reading praxis might not exist if it weren't for something like a Goodreads account, if it weren't for something like Bookstagram to motivate you to post. That is fine. Are you maybe more interested as a person who's interested in culture? Are you out there saying, this is just really enriching for me and it enriches my life, makes my life better to engage with this particular mode of art? And if you say, hey, this is what motivates me there, okay. Regardless of your status there, regardless of where you land and the sort of combination and mixture between all these different motivating factors that lead to your reading, I would say, one of the things that would be really great would be looking at some other languages. Because then you're really starting to see, even just looking at how a text is rendered on the page without understanding it is really profoundly interesting. And, for those folks who are out there wondering, how does a translator select a work? How does a translator translate? How does a person in another culture express themselves? How do they relate to this? How do they relate to the text? How do they form the novel? What do they think of the novel? All of these questions are things that you can explore and you have the ability to. And, one of the last great things about the internet is that we're connected to all of these different cultures in a way that when I want to buy a book, I can do it. I can buy an obscure book in Spanish or German or Arabic. I can find my way to getting that text and engaging with that text, whatever that engagement looks like. And I you don't need to claim, "Oh my god, I'm only reading in Arabic now. I'm only reading in Japanese now." You don't need to do that. But if you love, Japanese literature and you really, really want to look at 1Q84 in Japanese, do it. There's nothing preventing you from doing that outside of maybe money. Uh, and, the other sort of question I would ask outside of that sort of status question there of, what is it that you're doing and why are you doing it? Which I think everybody should be, sort of critically self-aware in that way. Um, what else I would recommend, to sort of think a little bit more seriously here is to ask yourself the question, what constitutes a complete or thoughtful reading of a text? And maybe this is digging a little too deep into sort of something like epistemology or the philosophy of language. But I think it's a good idea to ask yourself, what constitutes a complete reading of this text? What constitutes a thoughtful reading of this text? And just explore your thoughts there. Um, because again, if you're not one of those humanity trained folks, that might be a weighty question that might take you a little time to go through. At the end of that or throughout that, that question might not ever be answered for you, but at throughout that thinking through, I think that there's a lot of sort of personal enrichment to be had. Um, if it's something where, I look at a text and, I have a basic understanding of Japanese, so I can sort of go through this text and I'm able to read it and I know what the words sound like and I can go through and I can read it, but I don't understand anything. If just looking at every word and checking the box is what constitutes your having read it, and that is what constitutes a complete reading to you, then you have read it. If there's something more there and you're looking for those subtle moments where you begin to understand, different ideas and things, and maybe it's just one word on a page that is all of a sudden really enlightening to you, that's a different threshold. And I think that's a threshold that every reader probably ought to be exploring a little bit. What is important to us? I see a lot of, oh, I didn't finish this, and folks beating themselves up about it, or, I forced myself to finish this even though I didn't love it. This is some personal philosophical exploration that you have to do as a person who wants to engage with literature, wants to engage with language and expressions of language and expressions of art that are through language. And it's complicated and it's messy, and that would be the thing that I want to say to everybody here, regardless of where you fall on these questions, regardless of what your thought process is or your conclusions are, I just want to encourage you to realize that a lot of this is messiness. And literature on the page seems extremely organized to us. It seems really rigorous, heavily edited, and it is. But that doesn't separate it from humanity. And that there is still that messiness throughout a text, throughout the expression of language, throughout the ambiguity in a text, whether intentional or not. And understanding and accepting that messiness might make it easier for you to dive in to some texts and start engaging with languages in a new and maybe more thoughtful way. Having a really rigid and prescriptive idea of language might not necessarily be the best path to giving yourself the grace to interact with more languages. If you've got a little bit of that Spanish and you've got a little bit of that French, saying, well, I need to understand every word before I enjoy it is going to prevent you from engaging in it at all. And in that same sort of statement, I need to understand every word in order to enjoy it, should also be preventing you from engaging in most texts in English. I have a couple of texts I want to recommend here that I have recommended a few times on the channel. And I actually have a deep dive coming up about one of them soon. That I might encourage you as to read as a first step towards this more thoughtful way, in my opinion, of engaging with works across languages. And the first one is written in English. I'm not exactly sure of its status in translation, although I presume that it is translated. I don't know how widely. The second is rendered in English and Spanish. The first, and this will have its own deep dive coming up soon, is How to Do Things with Words by J.L. Austin. These are lectures that J.L. Austin delivered in the 1950s. J.L. Austin was a philosopher, and the focus here is this unpacking of language, the philosophy of language. In particular, we're looking at what J.L. Austin refers to as performatives, as performative verbs. And these are verbs that aren't so easily categorized as true or false. One of the things that I see all the time out there, on different socials and different ways that folks are interacting with each other regarding literature, is this true false dichotomy, this good bad dichotomy, and that either or thinking, especially that true false thinking, can really complicate your experience of a different language. When I was having that discussion with my friends, and they were talking about how difficult it is to have that talent, one of the things that they admitted was growing up in a household without a lot of multilingualism. And without that exposure, without that modeling, we can fall into this true false dichotomy when it comes to the sentences in our head. Did I use this in a true way, true to its meaning, or is it false? Is my grammar bad? Is it not understandable? And J.L. Austin does a really great job of slowly unpacking for the reader why the true false dichotomy is maybe not the best dichotomy for us when we're thinking through our language. And he posits an alternate, maybe a companion, rather, to this true false dichotomy, which is felicitous and infelicitous, or happy or unhappy statements. Is a statement happy? Does it qualify, to the various contextual aspects of language? There's so much more in our interpretation of language that goes into context and culture. So I think this very small, it's less than 200 pages. It's dense, but it is really, I think, worth your while to engage with a little bit of that philosophy of language that might encourage you to say there's more nuance here than I understood, I didn't understand. The next work, which I have recommended a ton of times on the channel, and I will continue to recommend a ton of times, is Borderlands, La Frontera, the New Mestiza by Gloria Anzaldúa. One of the things up front about this is that it is rendered in both English and Spanish. There are sections in English, there are sections in Spanish. Likewise, it is a book of philosophy that also has poems in it. The experimentation with form here that Anzaldúa is using is incredible, and really should be something that you consider to engage with. Especially if you like philosophy or complex literature like the modernists or postmodernists. What Anzaldúa is doing here is so thoughtful, and it also pushes us to consider what can go into a book of philosophy, what can go in our language, what is it that allows us to code switch between languages, that allows us to say that expectation of this imaginary reader that I have is not what I'm going to focus my time on, but instead I'm going to focus my time on expressing myself in the way that my languages call for. It's beautiful, it's elegant, and it really, when it comes to, hey, I would like to get into intersectional feminism, Anzaldúa is right here, and I really would love for more folks to read her. At the end of the day, my recommendation is just to pull off the Band-Aid. Like I said up top, even just looking at the text is a rich cultural experience. One of my favorite interactions with Spanish I've ever had is I was in Buenos Aires, I was in a bookstore, and they had a copy of the translation of Finnegan's Wake into Spanish. And just looking at it, just looking at what a translator did with this text, this famously unreadable text in the English, and how they created this Finnegan's Wake in the Spanish was so exciting and thrilling, and also it was really mentally enriching and challenging and exciting, to have an idea of, wow, a person spent time on this and here I am looking at it. um that is not something to be undervalued, and it's not something to be dismissed, and at the end of the day, I think it's really well worth your while to consider more seriously this, and this perspective of multilingualism. And maybe this is a little idealism that I have here as a writer and thinker. Maybe this is my life in the humanities coming through here. But I won't give that idealism up. I won't give it up, because to me that really constitutes a really thoughtful mode, a mode that is well worth our time, and it's well worth our effort. And even if it is one of those things where, if we say, hey, comparative literatures is too tough, I don't love it, I'm only reading in English, fine, at least let yourself have the challenge. Let's not say challenge. At least let yourself have the experience of having gotten yourself to a point where you made the decision to only read in one language. At least let yourself get there and try it out, because you may really love it. And again, this is maybe my idealism showing through. And I think most people will really love it. I think most people will really find this really enriching, because language is so intrinsic to us as people. Our experience as a species is in large part defined by our capacity for language. Obviously, a lot of debate about that, but I'll stick to it. And at the end of the day, when I say, okay, I'm going to try, hanging out with this other language for a little bit, even if it's just flipping through the pages, that's my openness to other cultures in an active and thoughtful way that, I might not otherwise have the capacity to do. And I hope that you really seriously think about it. I want to thank everybody out there today. I want to encourage you, go ahead, pick up that book in Spanish, pick it up in French, whatever, Russian, Amharic, Japanese, Arabic, please do so. And, if it doesn't use those Latin characters, man, don't sweat it. Just try it. Try it out. It will be worth your time. I promise. I hope you're safe. I hope you're good. If you want to find out more about me as a writer and thinker, you can go to georgekors.com. You can follow me on socials that I may or may not use at GBK7288. Hands off DC forever. If you want to buy my novel, Sing Lazarus, please do that. It supports me. I hope everybody's safe. I hope your reading practice is going good. And thank you, everybody. Adios.